let's talk top 25, and we'll just kind of go through these and kind of give an explanation for some of these. The AP likes to throw out a top 25, and they're not going to give you an explanation. They're just going to vote on it and throw it out there, and then, it is what it is. We want to talk about it. So if you've got something to say about this, throw it in the comment section. We'd love to talk with you. Some of these are going to look a little funny, guys, because I'm going to tell you something. Really, like 15 through 25, I don't know who's beating who in these games. We're going to find it. We're going to find out with a lot of them as the year goes on. But I mean, some of these are just kind of just a mosh posh of teams that have won so far in 2024, and that's all we have to go on. We can't worry about 23. What we think the roster is going to be. I mean, we got to look at what these teams are showing us on the field at this point. And Boise State comes in at 25. Look, they lost last night by a field goal to Oregon. Boise State has got as good a chance as any small team in the country as far as, making the college football playoff. One team that's not in a Power Four conference, that is a conference champion, is going to be able to make it into that college football playoff, and I think Boise State may end up being one of those. Syracuse, as these are one of those teams I talked about. I'm not super high on Syracuse or anything, but I mean they're winning, right? I mean they're winning, so we have to respect it. They beat Georgia Tech this past week. It seemed like Georgia Tech was due for a loss. I can't believe we didn't bet on that game, but I mean it's hard to bet on Syracuse at this point, and so many unknowns. Arizona survives after driving the struggle bus pretty much all night against something called NAU, right? Northern Arizona. 0 for 10 on third down in the first half was Arizona. We're going to talk more about Arizona in our breakdowns because they've got a big game this week against Kansas State. So stay tuned, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one. Just kind of our initial thoughts on it, at least. But Arizona's got what I think is a pretty good offense at times, but seems like it's really, really, really inconsistent. And they've actually dropped down a little bit in our rankings this week after their win, just because they didn't look good. And South Carolina is a team that I really would have never thought, guys, that I would have in a top 25 that I was associated with this year. But this is where we're at. South Carolina absolutely bludgeoned Tennessee yesterday. Absolutely bludgeoned Kentucky. Let me just hit the rewind button on that. Tennessee fans are going to freak out. They absolutely killed Kentucky, man. I mean, Kentucky's offense had zero chance of getting really anything going in this football game. So I knew South Carolina's defense was a little spicy, but they might be like 3 Mile Island spicy on the defensive line, right? And that's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on, because we saw several games this weekend, Mason, where both you and I were saying, look how important that defensive line is. If you've got a defensive line, you can mask a lot of other deficiencies on defense for sure. And then LSU still trying to kind of figure these guys out a little bit. I think they're trying to figure themselves out after a devastating season-ending injury to one of their best running backs, John Emery, last week. Not something that we were able to talk about on the show or had the opportunity to talk about, but John Emery tears his other knee. He just tore the last one, last year, 2 years ago, whatever. Just really got back from that injury, and now he tears his left one. So really, really sad story there for John Emery. But going to be interesting to see how LSU, runs the football going forward. And they're going to need to be able to run the football this week coming up, as them and South Carolina, who are right next to each other in our rankings, are going to be playing. What do you think about this group?
Yeah, I mean, Boise State, spoiler alert, I've got them in the college football playoff after, really playing Oregon tough. I think that they could be that, at-large team out of the Power Four. They look good. I mean, they look good for 2 weeks in a row now. And I think that once they get into their conference play, they're going to steamroll some teams. And also, Liberty didn't look that great against New Mexico. So that's why you're seeing them in the top 25. Keep your eye on them. I think that it's very fair to put them in the college football playoff conversation at this point. Syracuse, Kyle Honda McCord comes through big. 4 touchdowns yesterday, 381 yards. Just looks like a really good quarterback. I mean, it's so surprising, I think, but when you look at what he was able to do against a Georgia Tech defense that's been pretty stingy so far this year, definitely improved. This isn't last year's Georgia Tech defense. I like what I saw out of the Syracuse quarterback there, and as a whole, I didn't watch this game through and through between Georgia Tech and Syracuse, but I feel like Syracuse has figured some things out. And Coach Fran Brown is as advertised. It seems like he coached pretty well in this game. I mean, a 1-score game, and I think that now we got to take Syracuse pretty seriously this year. Moving on to Arizona, look, I'm worried about them this week against Kansas State, and we'll get into that breakdown here in a minute. But for what they've been able to do so far, I think that we still feel really good in Tetaroa, McMillan, and Noah Fafita. That's kind of their offense, right? If I said last night, if McMillan's not getting 200 yards a game, I don't know that Arizona has much of an offense, which is pretty concerning. But for right now, I think that it's fair to keep them in the top 25. South Carolina, you mentioned it, the defense, and the defensive line in particular looks really good. We got a freshman in Dylan Stewart. The other end players playing really well as well. And that defensive line yesterday against Kentucky, they were so disruptive that it made the entire defense look really good, right? You had some players coming up, on some safety blitzes and whatnot that made them look really good. And we'll see against LSU, who's ranked right ahead of them this week. We're going to break that game down a little bit later on, but LSU, kind of bounced back. Didn't look great against Nicholls State. This was a close game at halftime. We'll see. I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup. They have to travel to Columbia this week to face Carolina and those fighting Gamecocks. I'm going to have to start calling them Scarolina right now because they could upset some teams moving forward with that defensive line that just looks so disruptive. Really fun to watch. I can't wait for that game and to break it down with you.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one for sure. All right, let's keep going. Oh, sorry. Let's keep going through our little list here. Iowa State at 20. I mean, we had to throw them in there. Iowa State is a team, guys, that returns just an absolute ton of production from last year, and their experience really kind of showed on the field yesterday as they were able to go down the field and win this game at the very end against Iowa. Rocco Beck did his thing. Hit a couple of plays on the edge of the field there, and they were able to kick that field goal, like I said, pretty much as time expired. So Iowa State is a team that is in it in the Big 12, and we've got to give them their due because the Big 12 is wide open, guys. I mean, we almost saw Oklahoma State go down yesterday to Arkansas, and Arkansas is not a team. While we do feel like they are improved, they're not a team that's in any kind of contention to do anything in the SEC this year. And Oklahoma State, I would consider to be certainly a contender in the Big 12. And that just kind of goes to show you, I feel like kind of where the Big 12 is at right now. It's hard to figure. It's hard to figure which one of these teams is going to be able to get hot at the right time. We talked about this on last night's show. I feel like the Big 12 is kind of turning into like a baseball division where it's like, all right, who can get a pitcher and a hitter hot, right here at the end and figure out a way to win the last few games. There's going to be some beating up on each other for sure. Oklahoma at 19. Some of the problems we talked about in the offseason kind of were rearing their ugly head yesterday against Houston. Houston's quarterback just absolutely torches the secondary, so that's kind of a question that is starting to arise about this Oklahoma roster at this point. We're just going to chalk it up right now to a bad week. We move Oklahoma down a little bit in our rankings, and we'll just kind of have to wait and see. But Houston is not a team that, has been known for doing a whole heck of a lot the last few years, really since Ed Oliver left years ago. Haven't really done a whole lot. Clemson at 18. I think Clemson is I think they're the second team to beat in the ACC right now, and that's kind of weird to say considering that Clemson started the season off getting thumped by Georgia. But I think Georgia is one of the few teams that we've seen this year that we can classify as excellent. And, um, Clemson's defense held in there as long as they could in that game. That's pretty much why they're here. That's pretty much why they're ranked where they're ranked. I think this defense is really, really pretty good for Clemson. I don't know that it's as deep as some of the best defenses in the country, but I think it's really good. Michigan, they're sliding. And if Michigan doesn't watch out, the cheese will just slide all the way off the cracker here. We talked about last night, talking about the Big Ten. USC might be the third best team in the Big Ten right now. I'm not so sure that Michigan can beat USC, and I forgive me, there's so many schedules in my head, I can't remember if they play or not. But regardless, USC looks like a better team than Michigan to me right now. And I'm just going to have to see more from Michigan to be able to kind of change my mind on that. But Michigan is trending down, and honestly, with everything they lost on offense, we probably should have had them farther down to begin with. Oklahoma State at 16. I think Oklahoma State's a good team. I think if Cam Rising is hurt, we talked about this last night as well. Cam Rising gets hurt yesterday in their game, goes out in the second quarter. Utah doesn't score another point in the football game. If Utah is Utah without Cam Rising, then give me Oklahoma State to win the Big 12 is kind of where I'm at right now. What do you think about this group, Mason?
Yeah, I mean, starting off with Oklahoma State, we keep talking about the experience of that unit. Kind of reminds me of TCU a few years ago, where they just had a ton of experience. But Oklahoma State beat a top 25 team, or at least a top 25, but based off of the first and long college football shows rankings. We did have Arkansas in our top 25 last week. Really liked what I saw out of Arkansas. I don't really know that them losing against Oklahoma State moved the needle in my impression of Arkansas moving forward. I thought that they played really well and just kind of lost the game more so than Oklahoma State won it. But I really like what I've seen out of the experience. I thought Alan Bowman put the team on his back at the end of the game, and Oklahoma State proved that they can win a game without Ollie Gordon. For most of that game, Ollie Gordon was held to very few yards in the running game. Did catch a pass late to get to really secure the win in double overtime, and caught a touchdown pass there. But I like what I've seen out of Oklahoma State. I'm with you, Mark. I think that Oklahoma State is now probably the second best team, second favorite to win the Big 12 at this point. I kind of slide them ahead of Kansas State based on the what we saw against Tulane for Kansas State this past week. Michigan, they got to slide down, right? I thought that Michigan's defense would have been able to sort of hold serve against Texas's offense. As good as Texas's offense is, I thought that Michigan's defense would be a little bit stronger, particularly in the run game, and it seemed like Texas just moved the ball at will, and they could run the ball at will in this game. They got beat up front, and they're down to 17 now because of it. Clemson, look, they handled business, scored 66 points against App State, which is no slouch. 66 points is a lot of points to score against anyone. And Clemson kind of proved that they do have a little bit of a pulse on offense. They've got to build on that moving forward, but they're definitely a team to watch in the ACC. Oklahoma at 19. Still really like the team as a whole. I think that they had a down week for the most part, and that kind of happens, especially with a new quarterback. That can happen, but I'm not going to go back and watch the Houston and Oklahoma game, right? I'm just not. I'm gonna chalk it up as an offensive sort of a bad game offensively, I guess, for Oklahoma, and we're gonna move forward. They got some games coming up. We'll get to see them tested here very soon. And then Iowa State, a big win in a rivalry game. We thought that Rocco Becht is who he appears to be. Really like what they've got at the quarterback position and a lot of experience overall on this team. last year we were looking at Iowa State, and we saw them lose a ton, right, going into last season, and we had them kind of low on our list because of that. And now this year, all of those players are returning and have another year under their belt. Watch out for Iowa State. I think that they're gonna. This won't be the last team that they upset, right? As we move forward, I think that they should be in the top 25 based off of that performance against a tough Iowa defense. I think that the Iowa offense kind of showed their true colors this week. The 40 points they put up in week 1 was a little bit of a smoke and mirrors trick, I guess. But Iowa State, welcome to the top 25.
Yeah, welcome. Let's see how long you last. There's been several teams kind of washed out really quickly after they appeared here. So we will see. Kansas State, we're going to talk more about them shortly, but breaking in a new quarterback in Avery Johnson, it was kind of a rough go at it, right? Against Tulane this past week, didn't cover the spread, and that kind of causes a little bit of concern. Gave up a lot of yards to Tulane. We'll kind of talk more about that one here in just a minute. Nebraska, they got to move up. After what I saw last night, a dominant victory. And yes, I said it right. The Nebraska Cornhuskers dominated someone, and it was the Colorado Buffs. And so it couldn't have been any sweeter. I know the parties in Nebraska probably just ended a few hours ago as we were recording this, because that stadium was absolutely electric. Nebraska definitely seems to have some momentum. How do they handle success is going to be a big question now. Not a team that has had a winning culture over the last few years, right? So how are they going to handle the success? That's just as important as how you would handle a loss. It's just in the other direction. And as Nick Saban would say, watch out for the rat poison for Nebraska. But for all intents and purposes, I like what I saw, man. The offensive line did exactly what they needed to do. I could have drove my truck through some of the holes they were opening up. Whether Colorado's good defensively or not, that's who they lined up against, and they beat their ass. And that's what you're looking for. Penn State at 13, I am not super confident in Penn State. I'm just going to be honest with you. After what I just saw with Bowling Green, you lose your defensive coordinator last year, Manny Diaz, and I was of the thought and belief that Penn State was going to have a really good defense no matter what, but they were slipping in the first half of this game against Bowling Green yesterday, absolutely slipping, found themselves in a tough position and ended up squeaking out a victory by a touchdown against Bowling Green last night. I'm just not crazy confident in Penn State at this point. Going to be, we'll just have to kind of keep an eye on them. They have to stay where they're ranked. I mean, I think they have a chance to be the second or third best team in the Big Ten, but I don't know if that potential is going to be realized or not. We'll have to just kind of keep an eye on them. I don't like the wide receiver room. Utah at 12. I feel great about Utah at 12 if Cam Rising is playing. If he's not, we'll find out more this week, hopefully, because Utah's got some big games coming up. So they're going to need Cam Rising to make his way back. They don't have a huge game this week that I feel like they're going to lose if he doesn't play necessarily, but when he's not out there, they don't score points. I mean, it is a dramatic difference. I think Cam Rising could possibly be an NFL quarterback, Mason, if he can figure out a way to stay healthy, because when he's out there, man, he is just in full charge of what's going on that field. Absolute field general. Louisville, one of those three is correct. They're at number 11. We don't know yet. We don't know yet about this team. I have a good feeling. I feel like they're in pretty decent shape. A lot of the fans feel like the defense is in good shape. I trust Braum to have a good offense and figure out the offense as the year kind of goes on. They're in contention for the ACC. There's zero doubt about that. So with the ACC being as wide open as it is, Louisville Louisville, whatever it is, Clemson, those are kind of your next tier below Miami. That's how I see it right now. What do you think about this group?
Yeah, I mean, I think Louisville is a little bit of a projection. I don't know. I'm certain that the AP Top 25 will not have Louisville at number 11, but I think it's fair to project. I really like the defense. I really like Gelati or Gelat, however you say his name, on the defensive line. I think that he's one of the best in the country, and you know, I'm anxious to see them in some competitive games. We'll see what they do in the ACC. I still think that Miami is a tier above everyone else in the ACC. That's a little bit of a projection too because it's Miami and they haven't proven it. I get it, but we've been pretty accurate in projecting a lot of these teams. And speaking of projecting, Nebraska, I think we're still ahead of the curve. I know I'm jumping from 11 to 14 here, but we've had Nebraska in our top 25 since the preseason, and a lot of fans have commented and said, "Well, what has Nebraska done the past few years? They're hardly a bowl team." I get that, but we're projecting based on the research that we did. And the research that we did led us to believe that Nebraska would win and cover against Colorado, and they did. And now we're projecting them to really go 7-0 to start the season. I think they'll be 7-0 whenever they face Ohio State. And if they're 7-0 at that point, they're going to be in the top 15. And I think that they should be. This is a really solid team. At number 12, we got Utah. I'm hearing that Cam Rising's going to be fine. It seems like it was a laceration on his finger, nothing too crazy, and it sounds like he's going to play next week, but who knows? With Whittingham, I mean, who really knows what's going on? I'm sure that he'll be back at some point, so I think that it's fair to keep them at the top of the Big 12 in our rankings, assuming he comes back, which I really do feel like he will. This is to me the tier one, the sole tier one team in the Big 12. Utah playing well on both sides of the football as long as Cam Rising's in there. Penn State, just what happened to this defense? How are there that many holes in the defense when you're facing Bowling Green? I don't understand it. Got to get better. Usually, I mean, and even last year we saw Penn State just blow out these teams that weren't named Michigan and weren't named Ohio State. And they really kind of should have lost this game against Bowling Green in some ways. Made for really interesting TV, but I'm concerned about the Nittany Lions myself. Already talked about Nebraska. Kansas State, a little disappointed in how they've been playing here as of late. I think Avery Johnson is still kind of going through the young quarterback stage here. He is just a true sophomore. But, if they can't get him up and going, I've got concerns about them in this offense. But I do think that they're still in the Big 12 race. I think that there's a lot of untapped potential on the offensive side of the football, and I'm not going to project too much about what they're able to do until I see it.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Let's take it into the top 10 here. Here's where I start to get pretty confident, you guys, and not necessarily with USC at 10, but really 9 through 1, I feel very, very confident in this ranking at the moment, given all of the results that we have to look at so far. USC slides into the number 10 spot. This is a little bit kind of just by default, just by what other teams have done, has kind of thrown USC into this position. That we haven't been guys that have been crazy high on USC. USC always has a high ceiling, though, because they're always going to have high-end athletes. D'Anton Lynn is making a big difference for this defense. And it really, all he's done is just put these guys in position to make plays for USC. Make sure they're in position. That's what a big selling point of D'Anton Lynn was coming over from UCLA last year as a defensive coordinator. He had a great defense last year, and you think he had a bunch of amazing athletes at UCLA? No, he didn't have 5-star defensive players at UCLA. He had a good system, and he knew how to get guys in position to make plays. And that's exactly what USC has been lacking. So it's not too far stretched to me to think that if USC, and this is something we've talked about all offseason and early in the season, if USC can field a defense that is somewhat, has some kind of wherewithal about them, watch out. Because the USC offense, while it may not be just amazing early in the season, I guarantee you by the end of the season, this offense is going to be really, really good, barring some kind of crazy injuries or whatever. So I'm going to trust Riley to figure out the offense, and it seems as though D'Anton Lynn has figured something out with the defense. Do they have the depth? No. But they've got a plan now, at least. They're not just a bunch of kids running around on the playground like they were last year. Alabama at 9. This is a team we've dropped down. We haven't seen Alabama play anybody, so it's really, really tough to, really know what Alabama's about. But last night, they struggled mightily with South Florida. And the final score did not indicate exactly what went on in that football game, but it was 16-14 Alabama late in that game, right? And Alabama had a chance to go in and score while it was 16-14, fumbles the football and gives it back to South Florida. South Florida had a turnover or two themselves that really aided Alabama. So it wasn't just a bad day. It was, it was an exposure of some of the weaknesses that we've seen over the last couple of years for this Alabama offense. When they had to throw the football, they had a really hard time doing so. And Alabama covers up their mess. They end up cleaning up last night, but something to watch. Alabama lost a lot of players in transfer portal last year, and as far as pass catchers and pass defenders, I've got some questions for this team. Lots of good players everywhere else, but I've got questions in those spots. And now I've got some questions on the offensive line. South Florida was causing issues for this offensive line for Alabama, and I don't understand that at all. We'll talk more about it. We're going to talk Alabama, Wisconsin here shortly. Missouri, we've caught a little bit of flack for Missouri being in our I think they were around the 10 spot last week or 12 or something like that. We've moved them up farther. They haven't beat anybody this year that is worth really mentioning. But we did all the research on this roster in the offseason. We know what this roster is. Yes, they lost a couple of NFL guys on the defense. They sure did. But offensively, they bring a ton back, and they're going to be really good on the offensive side of the ball. If as long as the running backs work out that they brought in on the transfer portal, Missouri's offense is going to be really, really, really good. Miami at number 7. This is the team to beat in the ACC. We watched them go into the swamp, which I don't think Florida's a good football team. So, we're going to take that with a grain of salt a little bit, but they stomped them. They didn't play with their food. They stomped them. And Miami looks like a team, really the only team in the ACC with any kind of killer instinct at all. And Oregon at number 6. This is we've had to move Oregon down. We had them much higher ranked, had to move them down. They've struggled the first 2 weeks with Idaho and Boise State. And we've noticed a couple of common trends in those games. Oregon's offensive line doesn't look very good right now. And I'm not sure what's going on. Oregon fans, I'd love for you to let me know in the comment section. But, and don't tell me about Idaho's defensive line. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. Idaho doesn't have near the defensive line of some of the teams that Oregon's going to play this year. So it's not about Idaho having an amazing defensive line. Boise State is a good team. They beat Boise State by a field goal as time expired last night. But we had considered Oregon a national championship contender, and so far they haven't looked like it. What do you think, Mason?
Yeah, with Oregon, offensive line, got to figure something out at center. I feel like they're struggling to run the ball at times. Really got lucky with a punt return for a touchdown late by Tez Johnson. First punt return for a touchdown since 2018 for Oregon there. That was a pretty lucky play, if you ask me. And also, the weakness, which we didn't expect Oregon's offensive line to struggle like they have, but the weakness in the secondary, particularly in the safety position, is kind of rearing its ugly head. They once again are struggling, or I guess not once again, but as we predicted, they are struggling at the safety position, not just in the passing game, but also in the running game. They were almost refusing to step up and make some key run stops against Boise State. The big reason why they struggled on defense was at the safety position. Going to see what they can do moving forward, but I'm concerned about them as they get into Big Ten play, get in against some tougher defenses and some tougher offenses as well. Not looking good for Oregon heading into Week 3. I'm pretty concerned about them as a playoff team, as a national championship hopeful. We'll see, but I think it's fair to move them down for now. Miami looks really good, right? We said it all off season. We really like what they have on defense. Cam Ward is playing like we thought he would. He looks like a Heisman hopeful. They've got a lot of tough games coming up, but like I said earlier, this is the team that is clearly planted as the tier 1 and the lone leader in the ACC, I think, and moving forward, they are a force to be reckoned with for sure. Missouri got them at 8. They haven't played anybody. They really won't play anybody until Texas A&M, which doesn't even seem like a tough game at this point. But they've got Boston College this week. Could be an interesting game. I don't see Missouri struggling with Boston College. Then they have Vandy at home. Should win there. They get a bye week, and then they go to Texas A&M. That'll be an interesting game, but I mean, you look at their schedule; they've got a real opportunity here to end up with 11 or even 12 wins when you look at their schedule. And I know that's crazy to hear, but other than Alabama, I don't know that there's anybody that I'm looking at to really test Missouri this year with how they've looked on offense and defense. Really impressed with the defensive line after they lose a first rounder in Robinson off the defensive line. I think that Missouri's got themselves a pretty good little program going on here, and they will be ones to watch in the SEC and in the college football playoff moving forward. At number 9, we've got Alabama. Struggled, obviously, like you said, against South Florida. Got to go to Camp Randall this weekend and play in a noon kickoff, which I hate. That's kind of the game of the week, but Fox has rights there, so they're going to do their big noon kickoff for that game. Should be an interesting game. We'll break that down here in a minute, but man, then moving on to USC. Mark, I think it's fair to question, is the USC's defense ahead of their offense right now heading into Week 3? Who thought we would be saying that? It definitely could be the case. I think D'Anton Lynn has to be, defensive coach of the year at this point. He's on a short list of best coaches on the defensive side of the football. Really turned around this defense for USC. Might be the number 3 team in the Big Ten right now, and maybe even second. With the way Oregon's playing, I think that USC right now could, at least for based off of momentum and all that, they're kind of the team that comes into the Big Ten and looks like the most challenging team for the Big Ten. So I think that the Trojans are kind of on their high horse right now and should be.
Yep, absolutely. Let's get into the top 5 here. Tennessee at number 5. Tennessee slides on up into the top 5, and they deserve to be there. I honestly, you might could swap them and Ole Miss at 4 right this second. Ole Miss hasn't beat anybody, so we're kind of projecting a little bit with Ole Miss. You have to project with some of these teams at this point in the season, guys. I mean, we look at the rosters. Although Ole Miss hasn't played anybody, we can't put them at 25. We know that they're going to be better than that. So Tennessee, Ole Miss, I feel like they're kind of interchangeable there. Nico looked really, really good. A couple of mistakes, to be expected. But overall, Tennessee's offense and defense looks to be as complementary as I've seen them in years. And we've been on Tennessee for a couple of months now, really ever since we did their deep dive in the off season. And the rest of the national media is about to get on that Tennessee train. I'm just going to let you know right now that Tennessee is going to be a team that's talked about a ton by the national media over the next few weeks, especially as some of these awesome games kick off. They got to play Oklahoma real soon, so we'll be talking about that game. But kudos to Tennessee. This is the best Tennessee team that we've seen in years. We'll see how far they can take it with first-year quarterback Nico Iamaleava. Iamaleava. There you go. Ole Miss, as I said, really good team. Don't know much about them. We know that they're going to be really, really good, so we've got them where we've got them. They're undefeated at this point, so no real argument, I wouldn't think, there. Ohio State, we kind of slid down to number 3. Again, we haven't seen Ohio State play anybody, so we're just going to have to kind of wait and see. They don't have the hardest schedule in the world, that's for sure. Going to play Oregon later this season, that game, hopefully Oregon can turn it around, because as of right now, that game's lost a little bit of luster, but it will still be must-watch television, and we'll know more about Ohio State whenever they go against some of those, upper echelon teams, which they have not done yet. Texas crushes Michigan this week, and they absolutely deserve to be number 1 or number 2 in this ranking. There's no doubt about that. Georgia crushed Clemson week 1. Texas crushes Michigan week 2. You could argue either one of these teams, I feel like, being in that number 1 spot. I feel like Georgia's a more well-rounded football team at this point. Not to say that Texas couldn't beat Georgia, because I don't. If Georgia and Texas play 10 times, Georgia's not winning all 10 times, I don't think. So I'm not sitting here saying that Georgia is for sure, head and shoulders above Texas, but you got to look at this group and think, we've only seen 2 excellent teams so far this year, right? As far as play on the field, maybe 3. You can include Tennessee with that, possibly. But as far as excellent teams in college football early in the season, I think Georgia and Texas are certainly in that conversation, and you could throw Tennessee in there as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Georgia still, number 1 team. There's no surprises there. I think that, if we wanted to get cute, we could have put Texas at number 1 and Georgia at 2. I think they're really 1A and 1B based on what we've seen on the field at this point. Texas, their offense is a little bit ahead of Georgia's right now. Georgia's defense is, I think, a little bit further ahead of Texas's defense, which is why they get the nod here at number 1. But speaking of Texas, I'm really surprised with what they've been able to do on the defensive line and stopping the run game. Michigan did not run the ball well against Texas. They played pretty good against the run the week before. Let's see if that continues, because I think that's kind of the biggest question mark on the defensive side of the football, is that defensive line up front. If they keep playing like they are, they're going to be one of the teams to be reckoned with in the SEC. By the way, we do get a Georgia at Texas matchup later in the year. That one looks ever so enticing after a strong performance by Texas in week 2. Ohio State, look, I mean, based on what we've seen in the Big Ten so far this year, it looks like Ohio State could kind of run the gauntlet and go 12-0. They do have to go to Oregon, but right now, if I'm picking that game, I'm picking Ohio State to beat Oregon, based on what we've seen from Oregon so far this year. Anything could happen. If anything, this past week kind of proves that anything can happen in college football. But Ohio State definitely the leader in the Big Ten at this point. Ole Miss, haven't seen them face anyone, but they look really good. Even playing nobody type of games and type of teams. This past week, Jackson Dark was 24. Started the game off 24 of 24, which tied a record. I believe I know it was an Ole Miss record. I think if he had gotten 2 more, it would have tied the record for FBS. 26 straight completions would have gotten there. But really strong performance. He's planted himself in the Heisman conversation, I guess, for Jackson Dart there. Got to see him continue, but it looks like he's just got a plethora of options around him. Also, Harris coming over from Miami, the running back, has 4 touchdowns on the ground. Really strong performance by him. I think that they've got themselves a really good running back in Harris. And then Tennessee, I firmly look. We said it last week that Tennessee could be playing themselves into a top 5 sort of program here. I didn't think it would come this quickly, but after that performance against NC State, and it wasn't just the fact that they beat NC State; it was how they did it. Style points matter in college football. They looked very stylish against NC State. I think we might have had NC State a little bit too high going into the season, based on what we've seen on the field. But I thought that Tennessee played really well. Nico looked good. Did throw a couple of interceptions, but followed up those interceptions with touchdown drives. I think he showed a lot of poise, and Tennessee is going to be the darling of the media here in the very near future, but they deserve it. They look like a really good team.